welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Sue Kleiner. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Erik Bustillo.
Hello, hello. What's happening?
And we are so happy to be here to, have fun, chat, and talk to you today about a topic that we hadn't planned on, but has come to the top of the list of topics. So today, the topic is hydration. It was going to be intermittent fasting. You'll have to tune into the next podcast for that one, just a little teaser. So if you enjoy our podcast, please share with your friends our links. We are on all the podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube if you'd like to watch us and listen to us at the same time on the Move Nutrition Network. So, welcome, Erik.
Thank you, thank you. Hopefully, you're staying hydrated with this heat. I know I'm certainly trying to.
Man, it's relentless. I'm in Seattle where I've been here now for over 30 years, and we have never had just continuous weather. Everyone else in sort of the Southwest and where everyone else is dying with triple digits. But here in Seattle, us to hit high 80s, mid 90s, day after day, week after week is extraordinary. It really is unusual. And we're not prepared for it. And something like, I think, a third of all dwellings here in Seattle, so homes, do not have air conditioning because we never needed it before. So it's an issue. I spent the last 10 days at my sister-in-law's gorgeous regenerative farm in Taos, New Mexico. Taos, New Mexico is at 7,000 feet, and it was over 95 degrees day after day. And if you're watching now, you can see how my lips are still chapped from just being unable to stay hydrated. And it was hot. I had on tons of sunscreen, a hat, a kerchief over my head. We were pretty covered. We went out around 6 to 6:30 in the morning, we all help with the harvesting and the farm work. It's kind of a family reunion. We love it. But by 11:30 in the morning, certainly by noon, we had to retreat inside. It was just too hot.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. I mean, well, it is kind of crazy to hear that about the Pacific Northwest. Um, I live in the complete opposite end of the country, which is down here in beautiful, sunny South Florida. And I too have been in Miami for over 30 years. I was born and raised here, never lived anywhere else, and I I feel it. It's wild to me. And I like the heat. I like training in hot, humid weather.
Woo!
Maybe it's just a
Yeah.
conditioning thing. I know it's crazy.
Hot yoga.
But when I was in high school, hot yoga, yes, and even like hot CrossFit. I growing up, especially my high school years, I remember being in football and we had two-a-days practice. It was just like 1 week
Hmm.
long of two-a-days. It was like in August. Um, and it was hot. These were brutal practices. I remember the some of the best times in practice, other than like when practice was done, like
Right.
from dealing with the heat and exhaustion standpoint. Now, just as a side note, I love practice. Like I was someone who hated missing practice. People would complain about having to go to practice, and I was ready for it in track and football, whatever else. Um, I also don't like missing things. Like if I have a dentist appointment, like I don't want to miss that either, you know?
My husband would be
Uh,
very happy to
so
hear that.
yeah, I'm a very good patient for sure. So if I lived in Seattle, I already know who I would see. Um, so it was the best time was when we would call it the cow. The cow was basically this container that kept water very cold and it had hoses.
Oh,
It had multiple hoses on it, right? I guess
yeah.
cow because of like the udders. So it had maybe like three per side, so six of us could drink from this thing. We would open up the hose, and this very cold water would come out, and we just kind of let it come into our mouths. And that was one of the best things. It was cold. We would put it on ourselves and our helmet and our jerseys and all that. Anyway, with all of that, I don't recall summer being this hot. Like it feels like it's gotten worse maybe every year, slowly but surely. But it feels really, really hot. And mind you, coming from someone who enjoys this, I'll even look at my phone sometimes and I'll check the weather, and I'm like, God, let me just check and see what the temperature is. And my phone will say 94 feels like
Right, because of
104.
your
And
humidity.
then the
Yeah.
humidity, for sure. The humidity will be anywhere from 50 something percent to, well, anywhere north of that, really. And it just feels like thick. So, but for me, this is something that I can be used to, or that I am used to because I grew up here. If I were to go to Arizona or New Mexico right now, that that feeling like an oven to me is just like it's so uncomfortable, even though the humidity is still uncomfortable because
Right.
you perspire. But that oven, I don't want to feel like I'm baking. So for me, that just feels so
So
foreign, you
you're
know?
kind of basting, and in New Mexico we were baking.
Exactly. Exactly. To use the food terms. Exactly.
So
That's exactly
so
it.
you know, when I'm
Yeah. And
working with athletes, you know, as you were talking about hydrating with the cow and pouring it over your head, that's actually an issue. Like, they start out with, maybe they're handed a cup of water, they take a few gulps and they pour the rest over their heads, right? And I have to say, no, 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 no. You actually need to drink that. You can pour extra over your head, but you really need to drink the full cup of water, especially during those two-a-day workouts in football. That's a big deal. And when the trainer comes to you and hands you a drink, or you're given a break to go drink, you really have to drink it. And then, right?
most
Because
definitely.
pouring it over your head is not
Yeah.
hydrating. But the other part of hydration is the electrolytes. And while most people, we always talk about, most people are not sweating enough or doing enough physical activity to sweat out a significant amount of electrolytes. And, you know, if you're only doing an hour of exercise, just water is plenty. In this heat, that's actually no longer a fact. People are losing electrolytes, and you cannot fully rehydrate without the combination of both fluid and electrolytes. So let's talk a little bit about, I know you work with the military. What is the
Yeah.
strategy? What are you teaching the recruits to enable them to be in any kind of environment and stay functional?
Well, the first thing that we start to go over um, is the educational piece of the importance of hydration. So everyone knows that they have to drink, but it's important for them to know like why hydration is even important in the first place. So once we get a little bit of that educational piece out of the way, just strategies for them to hydrate well. Um, I remind them of the electrolytes. That's one of the very important topics. And in some cases, uh, it's an interesting conversation because let's say if I'm working with the reserves, with the Army Reserves, um, the military is not their full-time job. So sometimes that conversation turns into, are you being active and physically
Mhm.
fit, right? If you are, so hydration should look like this, that, and the third. If you're not being active and physically fit, it's encouraged that you begin and all of that. So different populations within the military. But for the individuals that are very active and they're regularly in the military, talking about electrolytes and whether it's something as simple as adding some more salt to your food or adding some salt into your beverage, um, either one of those can work. And then obviously there are the those packets that you can add to your water. Those
Mhm.
electrolyte packets. It's just a powder, comes in a like a self-serve or a single serving packet. And there's different companies out there. We're not sponsored by any of them. If they are interested in sponsoring, then let me know. But yeah, you have like the drip drop, the liquid IV, the element, but it's spelled LMNT. Those are all a few
Noon is
different
another
ones,
one.
and yeah, yeah, noon. Um, so just encouraging people to do that, and obviously you have the original ones like the Gatorade and the Pedialytes and those things. Even though their electrolyte, what they contain, is nowhere near what these packets contain as far as electrolyte content. Um, so encouraging them to focus on hydration throughout the day. It doesn't only have to be water, right? So there are other forms of hydration too, like the coffee that you drink is hydrating you. When people think that it dehydrates, and it doesn't really dehydrate.
Up to about
Um,
600 milligrams of caffeine a day. So, depending on if you're
yeah,
drinking a venti or an extra large gulp
is,
coffee versus
is venti small or
that's the
tall
huge
or?
one, or and like I said, or
Got it.
or a big gulp of Mountain Dew, right? That's that doesn't even fit in your cup holder. Those or some of the energy drinks which have higher amounts of caffeine. An average cup of coffee, drip coffee, is somewhere around 100 to probably 125 milligrams of caffeine. So, if you're drinking 3 cups of coffee at once, you're getting up to close to 400 milligrams. And if you do that twice in a day, well, that is putting you over the amount where caffeine will become a dehydrator. But it is a dose response. It's a drug. If you don't drink the dose that gets you to the point of dehydration, then it doesn't act as a dehydrator. So if you're, one or two sodas with caffeine a day, 1 or 2 cups of coffee, regular coffee or tea or other beverage, um, that has less than 600 milligrams, just to get into the weeds on this one. But it's really important because when we do drink an iced coffee, right? And maybe that's your source of wonderful milk for the day. We don't want you to avoid that thinking it's a dehydrator. It's not. That adds to your total fluid of the day.
For sure. And I appreciate you clarifying the milligrams of the caffeine and all of that, because this was actually a conversation that I was having with some of the folks from the military, where they were asking about, does coffee count? And I was like, yes, it does. And contrary to popular belief, it's not really a diuretic in the way that people will make it sound, right? So, of course, if someone is very sensitive to caffeine, or if they don't drink it very often, then maybe they'll be like a hyper responder to that. Um, but there was one person in particular who was drinking minimal water. They were drinking multiple energy
Mhm.
drinks throughout the day, at least one, let's just say, at least one, but also having coffee and also
Mhm.
having soda throughout the day. And these were the main forms of hydration. So this individual, there's a good possibility that they were reaching that 600 milligram of caffeine, maybe rather quickly and early in the
Right,
day,
right,
you
for
know?
sure. Yeah, it can happen.
Um, Well, for sure, yeah, without a doubt, it definitely can. Um, but I also think that people should know that the coffee, if someone is just a regular coffee drinker and not having these massive amounts, it will help
Mhm.
hydrate them. And if they feel like they have to urinate after having coffee, generally speaking, that's just because of the fluid that came in from drinking the coffee. It's not so much the coffee
Right.
causing them
Right, for
to
sure.
go
For
urinate,
sure. Yeah. And then there's the folks, and this is an area that I've recently gotten into. Um, there are people, it's very difficult in this weather. There are people who purposefully moderately dehydrate themselves. So if going to the bathroom is going to interrupt your workflow, think a surgeon, or you're being monitored, and your time on the job is docked every time you go to the bathroom. Think UPS drivers, truckers, anyone who The time, if the time that they take to stop doing their job in order to go to the bathroom is a big deal. um, Even teachers. This is something new that I found out. Teachers, well, how do they just pick up and go to the bathroom? They only want to have to go once or twice a day, and so these people
And it's also law
oh,
enforcement
sure,
officers too, if they're
right.
on patrol. Yep, if they're in patrol.
So they're going to
Yep.
purposefully dehydrate themselves. So what kinds of things can they do? Let's say they they don't drink in the morning when they leave. We always tell people, when you wake up, that's the best time to have a couple of cups of fluid, because you wake up dehydrated in the morning for sure. That's why everyone loves to get on the scale and weigh themselves first thing in the morning because you weigh less.
I lost weight.
Um so you are dehydrated after an overnight fast. And so they stay that way. They purposefully do not drink. Um, but as their day goes on, they go from maybe 1 to 2% of loss of body weight in fluid, which we call mild dehydration, where it's slightly measurable that you have a functional loss, maybe cognitively or even physical performance. Some people are more sensitive than others, but certainly by the time you get to 2.5 to 3% of a loss in body weight, now you have really statistically measurable deficits, both in physical performance and in cognitive function, in how you feel for sure. I mean, 1 to 2%, you're feeling it, you notice it, but and we'll go through what those symptoms are. But if you're now on the job in the morning and you're not drinking, now you've gone from 1 to 2% to probably 2.5 to 3% in the days going on, and it's really hot. And now you may be getting into trouble. And so the the effects of that early sort of we call chronic mild dehydration. I wrote a review. I think it was published in 1999. That in that data, and it hasn't changed, that somewhere between 60 to 65, maybe 70% of the US population is chronically mildly dehydrated, down, 2 to 3 cups of fluid a day. And that is, 2 to 4 cups, 1 to 2 pounds of fluid. That's enough for you to notice that your eyes burn or your mouth is dry, your lips are dry. Maybe you have a little burning in your stomach, a slight headache, brain fog, just weird, not quite feeling right. That's mild dehydration. But when it progresses to 3% and more, now you've got real physical decrements, you've got mental fatigue, poor cognitive function, mood is changed, mental energy, all kinds of factors. Certainly fatigue at 1 to 2%, but absolutely at more than that. And everything that will certainly stop you from functioning optimally for sure. And if you get more than that, it's dangerous. And that's why we're so worried about people who work outside. So, one of the things these people can do, because when I talk to them, they say, I'm just not going to drink, right? I'm just not going to drink. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
They
Well,
refuse.
then the way sodium works in your body, and the reason that if you eat a really salty meal at night and you wake up kind of swollen in the morning, is that sodium turns on the entire hormonal system in your body that tells you to recycle water instead of diuresing or letting water flow out from your kidneys. So in the tubules in your kidneys, sodium acts to recycle water, bring it back into your body. And so these people who are already marginally dehydrated, having some sodium and other, you know, electrolytes by themselves may be helpful, maybe, at least physiologically speaking, we don't really have data to say, may help them um, sort of slow the rate of dehydration. That's my hope, anyway. And I am, to be absolutely clear, I'm working with a company that is interested in this, and we're looking to do the research. They will stay unnamed because they're also not sponsoring us. Um, or you know what? We said all the other company names. I may as well say them too.
I guess we could.
They're very early. It's Electrolyte Boost. The goal is that we want to be able to um, help people who otherwise aren't going to drink. But if you're not one of these people, um, there is no way to rehydrate without drinking fluid, just to be clear.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And of course, electrolytes are going to help out with that and all that. And also, as a side note, if you need any participants to test or measure hydration, let me know. I know a bunch of very active people who would be willing to
Cool.
help out. Um, uh, everything that you were saying there just kind of had my brain going in a million directions. I was thinking of so many different things because uh, when we talk about hydration and the impact that it has on the body and dehydration and everything, so a fun little story. Back when I was an intern, I think was I an intern or was I still a student before my internship? I don't remember. But a mentor and now friend, Dr. Doug Kalman, he um, he used to work at a research facility, and I participated as a participant in a study that they were running there, and it was a dehydration and then like a rehydration study. And side note, I think that everyone, if possible, especially students in our field, should participate as a
Oh,
subject,
yeah.
right? So they should be a participant in a research study. I think that it's just a cool experience. So what they had to do in this study was they had to dehydrate me, and it had to lose at least 2%. I had to be at
Hmm.
least 2% dehydrated. Now, for those listening that aren't exactly sure what we mean by that, it essentially means to lose 2% of your weight through fluid. So essentially, let's say they weighed me beforehand, and I basically had to walk and then run on a treadmill for an hour in a room that was it was supposed to mimic the outside temperature. So they warmed up the room, and I just had to run on there. They placed a catheter in my arm, and I had to run with the catheter and all of that. So then they weighed me before, they weighed me after, and sure enough, I was at least 2% dehydration. So my weight went down by 2%. So whatever that math ends up being, I guess if you weigh 100 pounds and losing 2% of your body weight is going to be just a couple pounds or so. Um, so it was interesting because I felt the symptoms. I felt like like if I couldn't make a decision very well or I wasn't very quick with my
Right,
brain
right.
power. It felt
Hmm.
kind of foggy. I felt lethargic, very low energy. But then something else interesting happened. Um, and this is why I encourage individuals. First off, hopefully you are getting an annual physical done every year, getting blood work done and all that. And when you do get blood work done, make sure you drink water before getting your blood work done because it helps with the blood coming out. So the blood was just not even coming out of the catheter. It could have been that my blood just tended to clot very quickly. I really think that it was more so the dehydration. And this was the most unfun or not fun part of this study. They had to start doing just like straight sticks into
Oof.
my arm with the needle to try to draw blood. So since the catheter was like jammed up or whatever, they were trying to do that. And mind you, they did it multiple times, at least 4 or 5 times. And I was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. So dehydration is a very real thing, and it even impacts the flow of blood. We sometimes forget the importance of hydration and we think it's just like electrolytes and whatever else. But we know that it can have an impact on things like energy and mental cognition and the function of it all. But even transporting of nutrients throughout the body. our water soluble vitamins, our B vitamins, our vitamin C, and the ability for blood to flow very well throughout the body. Our bodies are at least 50% water. A lot of that is also contained in our muscles. So as we get older, we should be lifting weights and supporting muscle mass to directly or indirectly support hydration, right? Um, but all these things are affected. And something else that I've found, and I love that you mentioned something about like the tubules and all of that regarding hydration and all, is, and I haven't looked up studies on this in particular, but I've seen it anecdotally. There have been cases where individuals are not consuming enough fluid, and it sure enough has a negative impact on their
Hmm.
blood pressure. One of the biggest things that ends up happening is by getting them to focus on their hydration. Now, as a side effect to that, if it improves, if their hydration improves, their blood pressure actually
Well,
comes
sure,
down a little bit.
because when your fluid volume of your blood is low, your vessels have to work harder. It has to squeeze more, right? To move the fluid around so your blood pressure goes up. And when you're fully hydrated, your vessels don't have to push so hard to move everything around against gravity. So 100%, that's true. And there's other important factors. Um, Anyone who has kidney stones probably knows that the greatest dietary thing they can do to decrease the risk of kidney stones is staying well hydrated. There's other diseases, and sort of syndromes. If you have a heart murmur, it's highly sensitive to your level of hydration. Again, because the sort of the how turgid your cells are. If they're not fully hydrated, they kind of your cells just get kind of floppy. And so that can encourage a heart murmur, not in people who wouldn't have one typically, but occasionally it can happen in someone who doesn't otherwise have a heart murmur. Hormone sensitive cancers have also been shown to have a higher incidence when there is regular chronic dehydration. um, Cancers of the urinary tract, cancers of the bowel, of the entire digestive system, but certainly colon cancer and other cancers of the bowel are shown to have an increased risk when you have um, chronic, even mild dehydration. And as I said, you were talking about all these blood pressure, stroke, all kinds of cardiovascular and brain issues are at higher risk if you are always even just mildly dehydrated. So these are real issues, and there are real health consequences even to mild dehydration. On the flip side, there is something called hyperhydration, and that is a problem often among people who are super health conscious. So, so I'm going to let you talk about that too, Eric.
Yeah, for sure. Because we imagine what gets pushed so much is dehydration. You don't want to be dehydrated. Make sure you're getting your electrolytes. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Drink a gallon of water a day at least. People come up with all these different things. Um, and you can have this overhydration where the symptoms can actually be quite similar
Hmm.
to dehydration in a way. Because if you're overhydrating, now one of the greatest risks is losing electrolytes, particularly sodium. So now if someone is hyponatremic, right, where their sodium levels get dangerously low, you can see confusion, brain fog, lethargy, just feeling tired, and all of that. So we have to be mindful of these things. Um, that whole drink 1 gallon of water a day, that is so arbitrary. It's not like it's the rule. Um, the rule, right? Not really a rule, but like maybe a rule of thumb for some people that I personally like, and it's just to get them started because everything is so individual. Is thinking about the whole divide your weight in half and drink that. And again, that's just to help somebody get started. Because in some cases, maybe it's too much depending on their physical activity and where they live. In other cases, it might not be enough. For active populations, these are the things that we want to be mindful of to help prevent dehydration and overhydration. Where does somebody live? Do you live somewhere hot and humid? Is your work physically demanding? Do you sweat a lot? Do you live at elevation? Um, Something else that I think that people might not even consider is how much talking they do throughout their day, because we perspire through our spit and our breathing and all of those things. So even thinking about something along those lines. And then of course there's always the pee test. Looking at the color of our urine is so important. We don't want it to be highlight or yellow. I mean, maybe it'll come out that way if you just took like a multivitamin or a B complex or something. Maybe the first one or two P's after taking that, they might come out that way. Um, but then we want to make sure that it stays maybe clear with a hint of a little something. So maybe not being fully clear 100% of the time. And again, it's a spectrum. It's going to kind of come and go depending on what we've eaten and how much we've eaten and the things that we've consumed, um, like the electrolytes and all that. But being mindful of that urine test. And then, of course, I think for people to pay attention to this is important too. The individuals who are physically active, which hopefully is everybody, um, weigh yourself fully naked before going and training. And then go train, do your thing. Then when you get back in from training, weigh yourself again fully naked. And if there is a weight difference, because some people they are so good about hydrating during their training that they might not have a
Right,
huge
right.
loss of fluid or they replenished it during. Um, but some people might lose anywhere between 2 and 6 pounds in one big long session, right? And again, depending where they live and what their training looks like. So for every pound that somebody loses, we want to think of rehydrating with 16 to 20 ounces of fluid for
So
every
that's
pound
two
that's
to two and a
lost.
half cups.
So
Yeah.
2 to 2.5 cups, exactly. So if you lost 3 pounds, now you're looking at 3, 16, 48 ounces or so, 48 to 60 ounces, right? If you're going to stick to that 16 to 20 ounces per pound lost. So I think that that's an actionable item for people that are hyper vigilant of their health and their hydration, to be
So
mindful
one
of.
of the sayings I have taught every person I've ever worked with is old, and it's a pint's a pound the world around. So every pound that you lose takes a pint at least. One pint is 2 cups. And so if you it and that's at least like Eric said, it may be 2.5 cups because we do lose some of that fluid just in the metabolic processes of rehydrating. And so um, I but it shouldn't have to be, and it probably shouldn't be just plain water. Make sure that you're eating and you're getting in electrolytes from fruits and vegetables, getting some, salty foods in, or using something that has some sodium in it, added if it's a packet, or somehow that you're getting in the electrolyte boost that you need along with the fluid. Because if you just take in a ton of water, it's possible that you're going to dilute your bloodstream, and that's what we call hyperhydration. You get a diluted bloodstream, too much water, and the electrolytes get diluted, and that is dangerous. Dangerous because your electrolytes are in charge of your electrical system in your body. And if you can't get your muscles to fight, your nerves to fire, for your muscles to fire, to keep your heart beating and your lungs working and your brain functioning, um, you're likely to be in very serious trouble.
Most definitely. And you brought up an excellent point where a lot of times we think hydration has to happen through fluid, but there's plenty of food that contains a good bit of water, like watermelon, oranges, and even other sorts of beverages. Like people don't think about something like skim milk
right?
being a good source of
Milk is such an
water and hydration.
excellent rehydrator. The fluid and electrolyte content is so similar to our own. It's a wonderful rehydrator as well as a post-exercise beverage. So, but that is cow's milk, so it wouldn't be a nut milk. It is not the same. This is purely cow's milk. So, anyway, I think we have chatted away.
Lots of
and
information
and
and
it
source.
is it really is a passion for most people who are nutrition professionals, dietitians, and particularly in the active space and wellness space. We all focus on hydration because water really is the most important nutrient. We can go for weeks without food. We know that people have gone on very long term food fasts, but you cannot live for more than a couple of days without fluid. So, hydration is important. Focus on both electrolytes and fluid. And please, if you're out there in the heat, find some shade. Make sure you're taking in foods and fluids and electrolytes that will help you stay safe and healthy.
Amen to
So
that.
that's it for us. Again, this is the Your Food Matters podcast. Share us with your friends, and we look forward to next time. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.